I am so excited. This is one of my, I love doing this show every Saturday. It's my really, I'm a grandparent because really I am grandparent of five. And it's so exciting to talk to somebody who I'm included in one of their projects that's coming up. We're going to talk about the project, why I feel honored, grandfathers, and he's really my good friend. And he's a good grandpa. And he's across the country. I'm here on the west side. He's on the east coast. It's my friend Ted Page. Ted Page.
James, it is so great to talk with you again.
And so we always have a good time. You and I always have great talks anyway. And you're one of my
Yeah.
favorite people, my new favorite people. Congratulations on the upcoming book that's coming out. So can you tell people about the book?
Yeah, the book is it's called Good Grandpa, and it came about it started about 10 years ago. It takes me 10 years to write a book, so I have to get cracking on the next one, I think. But I found out I was going to be a grandpa 10 years ago, and I was just bowled over. And I thought, what is this new experience I'm going to have here? And I did a search on the web, and all I could find was references to the movie Bad Grandpa. So I thought, where are the good ones, right? So started a blog called Good Grandpa, and a lot of it was just processing my experiences, just totally bowled over by the emotion of it and the daily experience of just having kids around again. And it just kind of grew from there. And last year, the New York Times picked it up for an article on sort of how to be a better grandpa. And then I got just a flood of people coming, including like a literary agent who said, "Hey, I think this could be a book." And I said, "All right, let's go." And then he got me a book deal. So last year, I was just really cranking on the manuscript, and it was building off of my own experiences. So it's kind of my best of 10 years of writing for the blog. But a lot of it was just really outreach to grandfathers like yourself to hear other stories of grandpas and to learn from others, gather wisdom, and bring this together in kind of a compendium of stories and wisdom that can help our grandkids. How do we help them live a better life? There's so much negative stuff going on in the world. So that's really what the book is about. And it's going to be published officially in September, in time for Grandparents' Day, which as a grandpa, I don't know if this is your experience, James. Nobody knows when Grandparents'
They don't.
Day
They don't.
is.
They don't. Not at all. My daughter
No,
does. That's how I do it. My
yeah,
daughter
she
does. But no, my
does.
daughter. Yeah.
I don't think my kids have any idea, but I'm pretty sure it's like September 2nd or
Yeah.
something.
Yeah.
It's like having the day for window washers, it's like National Window Washer Day. It's like, what? How did that
It is.
happen? Um,
And window washers are important. It's like
that's
grandparents.
right. That's right. So I'm excited to get it out there and just kind of, I've heard some great response so far, but it really only happened through conversations with, guys like you, James, who just, you have an amazing life story in your family histories and I'm just crazy about family history. For me, it's like digging through this chest in that you find in your grandparents' attic, and it has all these old things in it and these things you didn't know existed. And everyone, I'm sure this is your experience, people you talk with, they're all carrying around their own treasure chest, but it's inside and you have a chance to like open the box and explore things and just find like the little glimmers of gold in the stream that you can focus on. And it happens in this book, that gold is the wisdom and the advice and the stories of folks like yourself.
We've talked about on this show. I've had other guests, so we talked about this. The grandmother, the grandma, is usually the focus and the center. A lot of cultural stuff, right? But the abuelo, the grandfather, Poppy, all the different names we have, not so much. I mean, you think of Santa like grandfatherly, so to speak, but like and jolly, but there's not a lot of stories about grandfathers. And like you, I'm talking to when I interviewed my buddy Eric Braden, I can say that one of the Emmy-winning stars of Young and the Restless, also his Rap Patrol and Titanic and all that. Talk about his grandfather, which we're on a conversation in Germany, and all of a sudden I'm like, we all have grandfather. Most of us have grandfathers have stories also who are part of the family fabric also, but we just for some reason, and sometimes I love my grandmothers. Trust me, I love them all. But it's kind of like they get the focus even more than fathers. Like fathers get more focus than grandfathers. It seems like, right?
Yeah. Yeah, grandmothers have really kind of led the charge around, embracing that role. And I think also they're much more prevalent in the cultural discussion about grandparenting, partly because they continue to live longer.
Yeah, true.
So the life expectancy is a big part of it. I would say that out of all the grandfathers I spoke with, it was actually rare that they knew their grandfather. That was less likely than not. You, you became a grandfather at the tender young age of 39, I believe. So you knew your grandfathers. But for a lot of folks, I'm going to be 66 in July. For a lot of guys my age, they just never had a chance to know their grandfathers because their grandfather passed away. I was really lucky. I got to know one of my grandfathers really well, and he happened to be this amazing character who was a pilot in World War One, and he went back to Europe in World War II. He was a colonel in the Air Force, and he was a storyteller and a singer, and so he had a huge influence on me. And that was part of like the genesis of the book was that you're right that the grandfathers, it's kind of unexplored territory, right? Like, what do the grandfathers have to say here? And I found again and again, I just talked to as broad a cross section of grandpas as I could over a period of a year, but just very different perspectives from different people about what they wanted to share as like their number one wisdom. And I wanted to see if that would form a pattern, like if you would ask enough people, like, what's the number one most important thing? Like, what do you want to share with your kids for the next generation? And there was patterns to it. There were things that I heard more often than not. And the things you hear from the grandfathers are different than what you hear. So I dived into that. Like, what are the differences between what a grandmother would say versus a grandfather? And one of them was, and I'm curious if this is your experience. I don't know if we talked about it before, but the grandmother I knew best, she would never let a family gathering go by without saying, I just want to say how much I love my grandchildren. I love my children. I love all of you. It's a special experience for me. My grandfather, and I'll bring this back to digging and dirt, because we were talking about this before in country life up in Vermont, but my grandfather, and like a lot of grandfathers, it was never hugging and, hey, I love you. It was, all right, we got some work to do. And we would go work on the family cottages in Vermont, and it was digging and it was hauling wheelbarrows of this around and that and moving boulders in the brook to improve the water flow. But that was how he showed his love, right? And he must have loved me a lot because he worked me like a dog, you know. You know what I mean? So there are differences. And like the stories that I heard from my grandfather, they're totally different from my grandmother because, he was a veteran in two world wars and he had stories about that. And I found more and more through my conversations, just those unique grandfather, nuggets of wisdom that I was able to compile together. And I don't think it's been done before. It's certainly nothing like this. So I think it's going to be an eye opener for a lot of people.
There were, like I said, I think I told you this when we were talking a long time ago. There were only two books that I saw that were direct. One was grandfather, one was great grandfather, and then one is Sidney Poitier has a book, Letters to My Great Granddaughter.
Yeah. Yep.
and that's one. And then, but that came out recently, not even just long ago, before he died. And then there's one, I think it's Fred Willard. If I had known being a grandfather would be this fun, or something it's called. And those are only two I've ever seen. I really, for grandfather, not grandparent, not grandmother, but specifically grandfather to grandchild. I
Yeah.
think it'll be the third person, probably. I mean, if we're wrong, somebody please tell me, contact me, let me know, because I want to know. I want to know those books. But I was scouring the interwebs and I didn't see anything like that.
Well, I think part of it is the grandfathers, A, nobody asked them, right?
No, they're right.
For the most part. Um, and B, women have been just, like Leslie Stahl had a book. She was with the 60 Minutes.
Yeah.
So she had a book called like Becoming Grandma, or I think it was something like that. But we guys just haven't kind of stepped up to that. You certainly have, but I think there's no one like a Leslie Stahl, like a Mike, was it Mike Wallace, or he's passed away, but there's plenty of folks who are, celebrity grandfathers, but they don't write about it. And I suspect it may be it's like, oh, we're the masters of the universe. Like that's it's still a little bit of that, the fathers knows best generation, a little old fashioned, like, oh, the women do that. It's like, no, no. I mean that's changing, right? I think there's so much more active.
Let's get real, Ted, for a second. This is what it is. Men are vain. They think women are vain. Men are more vain. We don't
Yeah.
like aging. We don't. Let's just get real about that. Luckily, I'm 800 years old, but genetics. And I think you look very handsome, so you're fine. But I'm just saying, men in general, we don't like aging. We're fighting that whole midlife crisis and getting the younger wife and getting the car. I think that's what it is. Yes, I'm a grandfather, but I'm still a man. So you're still trying to assert your manhood, I think is what it is.
Yeah.
But what's
Yeah.
happening, Ted, and because I've interviewed enough people nowadays, and we have a little network now. Now we have a little network. We have the good grandpa, and we have the cool grandpa, and I've interviewed the ripped grandpa who's into fitness. So it's starting to where it's starting to happen where it started with the whole daddy generation that started in the late like 2000s to now, where now the whole dad bod thing and the whole getting a little older is fine, I guess, a little bit, even though men are going to Turkey to get their hair transplants. It's crazy. It's like men are vain. We're vain. We are really like, we try to
Yeah.
blame it on women all the time, but we're the ones who are kind of like, we don't want our sons to overtake us. We're still here. I feel like that's what's happening. But now that we're letting go of that a little bit, now the grandfather thing is starting to take shape.
I think you're absolutely right. There's an element of like fear of losing your virility,
Yes,
uh, or being perceived as the older. And I experienced this myself because um, I started an ad agency years ago. I actually called it Captains of Industry.
okay,
And I trademarked Captains of Industry, just for fun, right? But talk about Masters of the Universe, right? I mean, that's my company. And I remember one time, every day I would, close my door and I would meditate for 20 minutes, just do some,
okay,
TM. It's the Californian in me,
I love
not, people don't do that quite so much maybe here, but
it.
just kind of recalibrate my mind
Yes,
or whatever. And when I became a grandfather at my office, and I had all these employees who were in their 20s and 30s, and I started sharing pictures with my grandson. I said, "Isn't this cool? This is amazing." And I didn't really think about it until one day I was in my office, door closed, meditating, and I heard one of my young employees say outside, "Where's Ted?" And someone said, "Grandpa's having a nap." And I thought, oh my God. Oh my God. It's begun. Grandpa's having a nap. It's like I
naps,
was,
like naps.
yeah. It's
Yeah,
like I was instantly part of this other club,
yes,
you know?
yes.
And
Grand.
I do think about that, and I think women have a certain fearlessness, maybe. And it's also like an eagerness. It's like there's a Saturday Night Live skit, which is really funny about how it's all, women playing, grandmothers and saying, you got to make me grandkids, whatever. And the funny
Right.
thing about the sketch is it way underplays the reality. Like women will say, and I've heard, I heard someone actually say something like this, like, Johnny, you make me grandkids, or I'm going to strangle you by the neck until you're dead. And then you'll be dead, and you can't make me grandkids, and I'll be sad because you're dead.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like, it's not that far from reality. It's like
Exactly.
they're like totally ready to
Right.
embrace this. And there's a lot more of the guys saying, well, Julie, whenever you and Bob feel like it's time, I'm sure that you'll make that decision. Like, we're not, not always ready to kind of, jump in there and kind of, because we don't want people to say, well, Grandpa's having a nap.
See, I told you. But I think what's funny is I think it started to change a bit. And I'm being funny on this show. I'm being like the whole gilfs and all this stuff. It started because we're living longer. We're starting to live longer. We're starting to look better longer. We're starting to take care of ourselves. Um, there's all of that. I think that plays into this. And so it's funny that you and others are starting to talk grandfathers now. It's like, oh, we all look pretty good. Great Payne looks great. You look great. I think I look great. We all look great. The ripped grandpa, he's ripped. And he's like working it out. It's like, but it's like and we're all in our 50s and 60s, and we're all just saying, and some in their 70s, saying, it's okay. It's part of life that you age. If you're lucky, you age. And secondly, your kids grow up, and many of them have kids, and that's just kind of what happens, and you become a grandfather. I mean, it's kind of right. I mean, that's how it is.
Yeah, it occurs to me that 66 is the new 66.
I'm
You
10 years
know?
behind. I'll be 56 in May. I'm 10 years behind you.
Well, I don't know if you heard this, but 56 is the new 56.
I figure it is.
Yeah. It's
but see,
like,
but you understand, in black years, I'm like 25, 30. I mean, I'm gonna look like this. I'm gonna look like this till I'm like 80, and then I'll shrivel up. That's what happens for us.
isn't the
So
expression like black don't crack? Is
that's
that part
right.
of
That's right.
it?
My mom has great skin, and she's almost 80, so I'm like, she looks good. So I take after her.
That's right.
But the
And your
inside,
grandmother, what's
that's right.
that?
So the inside's a mess, but the outside is great. Like great.
Yeah, no, I think the longevity is a part of it, and
Yeah.
trying to live a long, fruitful life. I did actually, one of the chapters rather, that I included was about grandfathers who were physicians. These are doctors who are dealing with their own sort of age-related illnesses or disabilities. Because I wanted to show all the facets of this. It's not just the fun of and the joy of being a grandfather. It's like as you get older, stuff happens, right? So, did a springboard off of a health problem I had a few years ago, which I thankfully recovered from. But then I talked to these two guys, and those stories just totally blew me away. One was a guy who started life as an emergency room doctor because he was pushed into medicine by his parents, and one day he became the patient. He had this massive seizure. They didn't know what's going on. Took 2 years to diagnose that he had MS.
Oh wow.
So then keeps working in emergency medicine in a wheelchair, bopping around. He has one limb, his left hand. That's all he has. And he keeps working. And then he has an epiphany one day and he says, you know what? I'm going to do what I always want to do. I'm not getting any younger. I'm not getting any healthier. And he becomes a professional painter. He learns how to paint with his left hand. It's the only hand he has. And he just carried on his life and became successful. He sells out his art shows. He gets together with his grandkids when he can, and he describes his life with his grandkids as unmitigated joy. And that just put all the challenges in my life into total perspective. Any health problems I've had, like it's nothing compared to this guy. But this also shows like that joy of being a grandfather kind of overrides everything else. So and when I think of like what's involved in like nurturing these kids or helping our kids nurture them, we have the easy part, right? We can
Right.
have fun. We can do the things that we love to do. We can teach them to paint, because we love to paint or whatever our particular thing is that gives us joy. And but just to be able to have that kind of joy no matter what goes on in your life, I think that's an important part of the story.
One thing you said earlier, I just want to touch on really quick, and there's two things I want to touch on. One thing, to answer your question, I had two grandfathers I knew. So, and one was crotchety and just, I mean, grumpy. I loved it. Made me laugh all the time.
Yeah.
Dry Dutch sense of humor from Holland, touch the sense of humor. And so he wasn't just one to say, I love you. We never say that. But my other grandfather, who's from New York, Puerto Rican, Brooklyn, whole thing, scream at you, yell at you, deep voice, but he would tell me he loved me all the time. And so what's funny is for me, my mother and them were like, he never told that to us. He never treated us that way, but he treated his grandkids that way. And I've talked to so many people on this show where the grandparent realizes, oh, I'm not there. I'm not their parent. And suddenly it's very softened up. And it's like I think I always try to tell the kids, I go, part of as we get a little older, I cry at commercials now. I mean, I'm a total softie in certain things at this point. I was hard ass. I was young. I would cry about nothing. I cry all the time.
Yeah.
But that's part of, I think, of aging a little bit and also kind of maybe mellowing out. Like I used to get into fights all the time. I don't fight anymore. I don't have time for that. I think my grandfather kind of just, he could have fun with us because we would come to visit and he was proud to take us to his job and show his grandkids off. He had a lot of daughters. So for me, as everybody knows, I have two daughters. So once I got grandsons, it's almost like my oldest Zayden is. I named him. He's been on the show. Folks, he's been on the show. I literally feel like I'm his father in some ways. He's my chance to have a boy. I didn't have a boy, and that's not folks at home. James is too old to have more kids. That's not happening now. I have no kids in my 50s. But now I got four grandsons. It's kind of funny. And I have one granddaughter, but I have four grandsons. So it's kind of like I got an abundance of boys to share stuff with and pass things down to them, which I've been doing.
Yeah.
But let's say for some of us, it's like two things. So for me, it was the opposite. You, mine was I had one who was like yours, and one that wasn't. It was a total opposite, a softie.
Yeah.
Then me, I'm a big softie. Like I'm crazy. I'm crazy, Papa Jamie. I'm crazy. I say crazy shit. They know how I am. I play with them, the whole thing. So I kind of took my second grandfather, and I kind of even took it a higher notch, and with my
Yeah.
grandkid. Like the two things I want to touch on. I thought it was very because you're right. The grandmother is portrayed as the loving, nurturing, almost extension of the mother. Here you come, but they're also portrayed many times as overprotective, scared. That's why especially when it comes to the boys, like don't let the boy like no, and we're like, come on, I'm getting a little dirty. I played with Tonka trucks that were metal when I was a kid. I
Yeah.
climbed trees and didn't wear no helmets or anything. Like we're a little more. Because we're men, we're boys. I mean, that's kind of I always get that way.
Yeah. Do you find that having grandsons, have you kind of rediscovered your inner boy?
That's a great question. You should interview people. I'm just kidding. That's I've never been asked. Okay, folks, I've been in this business 10,000 years. I've never been asked that question before. Um,
Because did you have brothers?
I did. Oh, I do. Yeah, I did. I have brothers. I mean, I come from a big family, so I have brothers and sisters. So I was a middle child. So I was that me, where am I? That kind of kid. So I had both. I had older brothers, younger brothers. So I do grow up with that. I had uncles. But they're not. I'm not close to my uncles now. They're not close anymore. But I lost a brother. So I'm close to my other two brothers. I still have. They have a brother I don't really know. But no, I was close to I had all my sisters. We were all close in age. And we all hung out together. Then I went on to have two daughters. So to me, in my family, I'm known as the girl whisperer. Like Uncle James is good with the nieces, or Papa Jamie's good with the daughter. Like I'm good. My granddaughter is super close.
Yeah.
So I think with my boys though, because I like playing and hearing what they have to say and talk about girl. Like, who you like this time? I always joke with this stuff. I don't know if I discovered my inner boy for myself. I don't. That's a good question. I have to think about that. I don't know if I have. I don't know if I did. It just was more like a second chance to be
Right.
a father to a boy. Even though it's not my kid. I was very clear, but it's not my kid. And I was close to his father, and I'm close to the other fathers. I mean, I'm close to them. They respect me very much, and
Yeah.
that's fine. But but I know with Zayden especially, I had to name him, and I became a grandfather so early, and I was still young. I had to fulfill more a lot of just kind of like this is what I would have done with if I had a son, so to speak. And he's
Right.
very athletic, very smart. So he was both a nerd and an athlete. So that
Right.
was kind of me too. So it's kind of like, oh, I could. So now I could actually talk to him about science projects and about football. Like we
Yeah.
had that. So it was more of like a second chance for me.
Right.
That's a very good question. But I don't know. I mean, the little boy in me is always there. The silliest jokes make me laugh. I watch those Army fails videos and I'm cracking up, and I can share with my grandson. So I have to share that with them too. Watching
Yeah.
people falling, hitting their heads. I love stuff like that. But
Yeah.
that to me, I've always had. I think I have a teenager inside of me all the time. It's kind of like always being silly.
You said something I want to just kind of build upon that I thought was interesting is like the difference between the grandmothers and the grandfathers in terms of like, the grandmothers are the nurturers and the grandfathers maybe more in the play realm sort of things, but we're one step removed from having to be the parent and be responsible for all these things. And I'll tell you something that I started doing years ago, and I found through my conversations with different grandfathers that other people do the same thing. It's like, oh, you do that too? And what it is like, and I do this specific with my grandsons, and not so much with my granddaughter. I don't know why, but first thing in the morning, like before their parents are awake, right? Let's say they're sleepover or they're just visiting. I will, before they've had breakfast, I will give them chocolate.
Okay.
I could give them a little piece of whatever chocolate I have in the house. And the first time I did that, they were just shocked. Like, what? It's like, do our parents know? It says, I'm giving you chocolate. It's okay. If your parents ask you, you just say, Grandpa gave us chocolate. Now, every time they come, I give them chocolate, right?
Yeah.
And it's my saying, life is sweet, life is short. I love you. Have some chocolate. No, you know what I mean? So I'm talking, I spoke to leaders of all the major world's religions who are grandfathers. That was part of the thing, along with lots of other folks. And so I'm talking to a Muslim imam.
Oh wow.
And he was a grandfather, and he was talking about his grandfather in the Middle East when he was a kid. And right after the fast of Ramadan, the grandfather always gave them chocolate, like first thing in the morning. So it's like we do it because we can. Like no one's going to say, Grandpa, you can't do that because we are seen as the one who can have that kind of kindness, that love without all the strictures of like, oh, well, is it nutritious? No, it's chocolate. Thank you very much. And I heard the same thing from a Chinese grandfather. And this is a guy, he spends about 6 months a year in the United States, doesn't speak English. He comes to visit his daughter, take care of the granddaughter. And he would always walk around with this little fanny pack full of candy. And he would just hand out candy to the granddaughter at random times of day. You know what I mean? It's like that's part of our, I hate to say our job, but we are free to do this. And I'm still not entirely sure why we get away with it, but I think it's because nobody wants to say no to something that's very sweet. Do you know what I mean?
Well, there's another side, but I have been told no about certain things. There's another side of this where I had a discussion on this once on my show here too about respecting the parents' wishes and being a grandparent. That can be tough
Yes.
sometimes because um, the conventional wisdom is you go to grandma's house, and grandma's house you do whatever you want, right? But when you come back home, it's back to that's your chance to play. But then there's sometimes where I was told, no certain terms, don't do this. Or please, dad, don't do that. We're trying to teach them, a lesson and something's going on.
Yeah.
That can be tough sometimes. I will admit that. It was like, okay, I'm like, but they're my grand. But I was a parent. I don't want to undermine their parenthood either. Like, there's a whole, or where you have to side with the parents and as a united front. And sometimes I've not agreed with their methods. So I've had to learn to privately tell them that. And sometimes I've changed their mind sometimes. Sometimes they're like, oh, well, maybe you're right or whatever. But it's still their decision where I'm like, I have to grin and bear it and kind of, and let them and have them and stay as united front because also you don't want that whole, well, I'm going to grandpa, I'm going to go to granddad and he'll just overrule you. They're still your parents. I'm sorry. There's a few of this. There's so many, like we get away with stuff, but there's times when you have to kind of like, your hands are tied, but you have to do it
Yeah.
with the parents. Isn't that funny how that works sometimes and how that is too?
Yeah,
They are
you gotta know
parents.
where,
They
where
are
the line
parenting.
is. Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
I haven't managed to cross the line too often,
That's
but
good.
yeah, I mean, I think if I gave them the entire breakfast with chocolate, that would be I don't want to make them ill, Or if I
Well,
said go watch what's that?
I noticed for me is when they got older. It's like so I have grandkids who are teenagers. So now they also have small ones, so they're a little both. But I noticed when they start getting to their preteens and the parents are trying to train them or whatever, trying to, whatever, that's when it
Yeah.
starts getting a little tricky, I think, a little bit
Yeah.
for me.
Yeah, you got to respect the parents' wishes, but maybe push the boundaries sometimes,
Yes.
just in the interest of having, the special times with the
Yes.
grandkids
Yes.
some way.
Yes. Well, one thing, like I said, we built this little for folks that don't know this. So we've been building this little. I met Ted through someone else. Like we kind of, I'm seeing this little network of people and that are grandfathers who are like talking about it. And I know, and like I said, not a lot of celebrities are writing about it, but some are talking about it. There's some out there who are like they don't. But see, the problem is a lot with a lot of men, especially, we're still having kids, even at later ages.
Yeah.
So they're still having the kid thing going on. So many of them have grandkids, but they have kids also. So the kid becomes the focus because of the kid. Like I said, James ain't doing that. I don't think Ted's doing that either. Like we're all done. Everything, the store is closed on that. I don't want kids in my 50s and 60s. I'd rather just have the grandkids. But I know that's happening too, where it's like they're still having kids also. My father, I mean, I have siblings that are 40 years younger than me. So I'm like, they're kids. I mean, it's like my father married again, someone
Yeah.
younger, and but I have grandkids older than my siblings. We have
Yeah.
that, and that's happening more and more too in families.
Yeah. And I think that's what I loved about your part of the story, is just a different perspective on um, that aspect of, family, but also the, your insights that you shared on how a lot of young people are just choosing different lives these days, like, your grandkids are going to school with people whose parents are same-sex marriage, you know what I mean?
Yes,
Or young people who are having refusing to, or rather choosing a different kind of work life than what we thought was what you're supposed to do. Because, I think, and that was something I found a lot in conversations was the kids learn from us equally from our mistakes
yes,
as much as what we do right,
yes.
right? So we lead by example whether we want to or not, right?
I agree. I agree.
If we follow a certain life and they see we're unhappy, they're not going to go that path. Maybe they're not going to take that job at $10 an hour and, lead some, miserable existence. Maybe they're going to choose to live with less and do exactly what they want to do with their lives. And I think that's part of the general generational shift that's underway, which is what I loved about your story. Plus the fact that your great grandfather was one of the great uh, Black
Wrestlers.
American championship wrestlers of the earliest 20th century, Reginald Seeke,
Yes,
who was
yes.
imprisoned by the Germans in World War II. I mean, that was one of those, like, open up the treasure box, and
Yes.
I honestly, the more guys I spoke with, the more I found like situations where I wanted to say, wait, can you go back? Did
Right.
you just did you say that? One guy I talked with, had an amazing life story. At the beginning of my talking with him, he said, "Yeah, I had a great uncle who survived the Titanic, but when they came over, I said, wait, can you go back?
Stop right
What?
there. Stop right
Yeah,
there.
yeah, I could have written an entire book about his
You're
great uncle,
right.
by the way.
You're right.
I went back and researched it, and I had this whole intro and a whole chapter, and
Sure.
it's like, oh my God, this is like right out of the movie Titanic. But I said, oh my God, I got to bring it back to, grandfatherhood. But,
Yes.
there are these stories out there that you just, in
And you
a,
know, and you're right. The thing is, I learned how to be a grandfather from my grandfathers. I was very fortunate to know my grandfathers, like you said, into my adulthood. I mean, I had them both to my adulthood. So I got a chance to learn what it's like to be. I knew what I wanted to be as a grandfather. I think also because they two generations before me or two generations before you, that's a whole different time period.
yeah,
And as I'm doing, I have another show called Really I'm a Caribbean Great Grandson. And that show came out of my ancestry.com stuff I've been looking into. And I found, I'm going to share this with you on this show. I'm learning about another great grandfather of mine, John Van Putten. I didn't know him. Go on, you can listen to that show, folks, to find out how he's my my great great grandfather, great great grandfather.
yeah,
So he came to America in the 1900s from the West Indies. But here's the thing: I saw something, a piece of paper that told me when he did a census, he was a carpenter, and I never knew that. I was like, I have a great great grandfather who was a carpenter, newly in
huh,
America, great grand, and I was just kind of like, and so I'm like researching this. So I'm like, it's just like you said, the treasure just keeps like I never like whatever his life was like. He had like 7 kids, and it was the 19th century, and my great grandmother was his daughter. She was like a baby. Like I just and but just the Ted, just see the thing that said profession carpenter. Like
huh,
what would that be like for him in the turn of the century, brown man from the West Indies in New York City, building like or
yeah,
fixing. I'm like now I'm fat. Now I'm completely fascinated. I never knew him.
yeah.
Never knew him. And it turns out I have several great grandfathers who both on both sides of my names were John. Learned that also recently.
Huh.
I have two great great grandfathers on my mother's side, my father's side. Each their names were John. Did not know. So it's kind of so like the grandfather thing for me. I'm completely fascinated. So that podcast, I'm sharing everything I'm finding on that podcast. It comes out on Saturdays, also after this one. But I've been so my family and I were learning together what I'm finding out, and it's kind of like, but it's grandfather. The grandfather stuff is what's really fascinating me because I mean, you didn't live. They didn't live as long. Many of them, they from that generation, they died in the 40s, maybe after the war, whatever. Or they
Yeah.
didn't live that long afterwards. They had a lot of kids. They must have worked all the time. I mean, I just wonder what the conditions were compared to our great grandfathers, grandfathers, and us, and fathers and us. I mean, it's just like you said, it's a little different.
Yeah.
Fascinating.
I think, and for me, part of that digging into the grandfathers and the great grandfathers and the family history was how perceptions of their lives then, like if they happen to know a grandfather or a great grandfather, um, a lot of times the grandfathers I spoke with had this really idyllic childhood where they lived next door to a grandfather. Can you
Oh,
hear us,
right.
Jane?
I hear you, but you go ahead. I heard you. It's
Okay,
still
yeah.
okay,
Yeah. So just they, grandma and grandpa were either in the same you
house
know,
times.
building house or they were right next door, like in Bensonhurst in Brooklyn.
Yeah.
And they would go and that, grandma would make dinner and they'd be all together. And
That
and
was my
now that was like paradise. And it wasn't like they weren't rich, but they were rich with that proximity and the being there for each other. And it was so special and it made such a difference to them. And I just have to believe like part of the challenge we're having in this country right now and other countries is success is defined by the best job you can get wherever it happens to be.
right.
So families are separated and the grandparents are not close to the grandkids or the children.
Right.
And that's not as good. It's just flat out not as good from what I can see in terms of like people's experience.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you've heard that in part of your conversations with people.
I have. And that's the thing. My mother in New York in the tenement, I don't know what a tenement was. I know that meant what that meant. in Manhattan, in the Spanish Harlem in Manhattan. I've been there since they fixed it up since. 103rd Lexington, folks may know that. Her grandparents were upstairs. So my great grandmother, who I grew up with, who I had till I was 25, I guess no till I was 25. It was kind of a big deal. She's a great
Yeah.
grandmother. She goes, we were downstairs on like on the fifth floor. She was like on the seventh floor, and then our uncle and them, they were on the ninth. Like they were all lived in the same building. They moved
Yeah.
in, they brought everybody in, and
Right.
so like you said, so my mother grew up with her grandparents in the same building. You went upstairs to grandma's. You're getting my nerves. Go upstairs to grandma's. You know, like whatever. That was like for us. Our grandmothers either lived cross country or another country, or they were. My one grandmother, lot, she was 10 blocks away, so we could
Yeah.
sit down there because she was the closest. But yeah, my grandmas, they weren't really they were, and they were working. My grandmas were still working. I mean, we all started young, so both my grandmothers were still working. My grandmas,
Yeah.
they all had jobs. So that face of a grandmother is totally different than too. This is the 70s and 80s. They all had jobs. They none of them retired till like, I think like 90s. Then they started retiring. I was
Yeah.
grown. I was already grown by then and had kids. I mean, it's like so. I mean, I was already grown. So yeah, you're
Yeah.
right. Or they lived, like I said, the next what was the next farm over? They were there in South Carolina. They were the next one over. So it wasn't far, but it was close, but it wasn't super far. Like it was like just go you're down the road, then go see your grandparents. You know, we're having dinner on Sunday, you know, go to see grandparents, that kind of thing. So yeah, it was very much that.
Yeah. So that was just, one out of many things like that I found that was kind of a revelation to me was like how many of the old things matter. Like, I mean, these days there's all these folks, the influencers, on Instagram who are selling luxury handbags, and great. I mean, more luxury handbags, but like I feel like we need more influencers who have gray hair, like to
Yes.
actually, you know, I almost want to tell people when my book comes out, listen, you don't have to read my book. Just go find some people, if you don't have grandparents, find someone else's grandparents. Talk with your parents, ask them what they did right and what they think they did wrong. You know what I mean? Like, just get it out there versus like always having to rely on whatever the latest post on Facebook is or Instagram or whatever. It's like these folks have so much to say, and I just hope that people just go out of their way to. And that was actually my number one thing because I asked all these grandpas for their number one wisdom, but I learned my number one wisdom from talking to them, which was find a reason to go talk with people, especially the ones you think you have nothing in common with, right?
Yep.
Because again and again, it's like, I'm talking to an Orthodox rabbi, right?
Right.
About his life. He met his wife in Crown Heights, Brooklyn. Well, guess where I met my wife? I met my wife in Crown Heights, Brooklyn.
Oh, how fun! I know Crown Heights. Very Hasidic Jews are very Orthodox over
Yeah,
there.
I mean, it happens to be, she's yes, Scottish heritage from Rhode Island, but yeah,
Oh,
we both
funny. Oh
met our
wow.
wives
So Crown
in
Heights.
Crown Heights,
Yep.
Brooklyn. I had an
I know
apartment
it.
there, and it's like I didn't know that, And there's so much division in the country. I think, a huge part of this I think of solving the problem, or at least making a dent, is like just go out of your way, talk to people who you might think are completely different. And you're going to find out things that you have way more in common than you thought. You know what I mean?
I agree. I agree. As we wrap this up, because I can talk to you forever, you know that. Um, I just want to say that I think it's great what you're doing, first of all. And I have to tell people, I'm saying it on camera. I am very honored I will be on the cover of the book. I'm part of the cover of the book.
That's
When I saw
right.
it, I messaged you. I was like, I could almost cry myself. But I thought it was very cool. It was very cool that you decided to include me as one of the people on the cover. So thank you.
Well, I wanted someone who was better looking than the rest of us grandfathers. So um, you're pretty prominent up there. I think you got like on like a purple smoking jacket or something.
Yes.
It's like, all right, let's class this up a little bit. Let's get some James Lott Jr. on the cover. Um, No, but I'm super grateful to you and everyone who took the time to talk with me because again and again I heard from people how important it is to be kind. A lot of grandfathers talk about that. But I couldn't have written a book unless people were kind to me and took the time to talk. So and your story is great, and I think it's a terrific addition to the book, and I hope people get a chance to learn about it. Pre-orders start, I think the pre-orders open sometime late in April, and then it goes on sale in September for Grandparents' Day, which of course no one knows about. So around September 2nd.
Yes, folks, you'll know if you follow me. You will know everything that's going on. I've been pushing the book and all this stuff. So don't worry. You go just follow James Lott Jr. JL Jr. We're gonna let you know when everything comes out, and you're gonna be buying the book. Even if you just want a
Yeah.
picture of me, buy the book. But
Yeah.
also, where can they follow you if they want to follow you?
Well, people can go to the goodgrandpa.com blog and just sign up for the newsletter, and then they can get updates on what's going on, including new stuff that keeps happening. I just something that happened this week, but I don't have time to go to it right now. But part of the story, one of the stories from NFL football player that I interviewed who played a role in ending the apartheid regime in South Africa. Um, a piece of that chapter is going to be archived in
Oh,
the South African History Online. So millions of folks in South Africa are going to learn how an American pro football player helped end apartheid. Just this stuff just keeps happening, which just blows my mind. But this happens because we're connected, right? Like, we can do these Zoom calls, we can email, and I don't take that for granted, that we have this way to connect with each other.
yes. I'll put it, of course, folks. I'll put it in the description where you can follow that, and also for the Slam interview, Slam article on my great grandfather, original Siki. You can actually go to slammagazine.com or slam.com, and you can actually just type in his name, and it's like a 20-page. Or this guy from the Bay Area did an amazing job.
Yeah.
Talking about his life and everything. He was going to Eastern Europe, the whole thing. He was written out of the history books, folks. That's what they did to black folks back then. That's what they did. So he's been resurrected, and so and also I just want to say as we end this program, folks, I don't have an older person to talk to like a father figure, grandma. They're all dead. I'm the oldest person in my male in my family, so I didn't take for granted that I did talk to my grandfathers and my uncles and older cousins. I did talk to them while they were here. So I agree with Ted completely. Find somebody older and an older man. They feel invisible most of the time. Talk to them. You never know what you might learn. And like I say, you may not realize what you have in common either. And also what wisdom they may have to share with you. So I encourage that completely. Follow me at James Lott Jr. everywhere. I mean, literally, I'm everywhere at James Lott Jr. See you next time.
Thanks, James.